Good evening. Um, Thank you for joining our webinar tonight. My name is Mary Ann Ashton, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters Acton area. Our panel discussion tonight is being recorded and will be available afterward on our website. Our webinar tonight is an extension of two ongoing projects for our league. First, this is the second event in our Margaret Kennedy Social Justice Initiative. Marge was a beloved longtime leader of our league who passionately and consistently gave voice to the underserved. When Marge died, she remembered us in her will, and we spent a long time figuring out how to use that money in a way she would have wanted us to do that. Our webinar tonight, focusing on ways that we can tackle barriers that might prevent people with disabilities from participating in town meetings, builds on Marge's legacy and also many years of work that our league has undertaken to improve town meeting processes and identify ways to increase voter participation. Our three panelists tonight will walk you through the whole process, requests accommodations to participate more fully in town meeting. Our first speaker, Jeff Dugan, is the Assistant Director for Community Services with the Mass Office on Disability. He will give an overview of the rights of individuals with disabilities, the Americans with Disabilities Act, as it relates to town meeting. Our second panelist is Wanjiko Khashoggi, who serves as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the town of Acton, and in that role has been designated as the ADA coordinator meetings. She will share her perspective on the work that happens at the town level when someone requests accommodations to allow them to participate more fully in town meeting, and that how she works with the Mass Office on Disability and with the town moderator to fulfill that request. Our third panelist is Joanne Berry, who serves as Acton's town moderator and a member of the board for the Mass Moderators Association. She will share some of her experiences and those of other moderators who have been able to provide accommodations for those who request them. We are also fortunate that Joanne and Wanjiko are both members of the League of Women Voters. After the speakers give their overview, we have a few follow-up questions, and then we'll see what questions you might have. If you have a question, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Before you ask your question, see if someone else has a similar question, and if so, you can give it a thumbs up. That way we'll see how many people have this question and try to answer those questions first. So, Jeff, and ask you to get started. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mary Ann. Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Dugan, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Community Services at the Massachusetts Office on Disability. MOD for short. I want to thank the League of Women Voters Acton area for organizing this important event, and my fellow panelists Wanjiko and Joanne for joining us tonight. The Massachusetts Office on Disability provides information, guidance, and training on disability-related civil rights laws and architectural accessibility. We help people understand their disability rights and obligations, how regulations apply to the specifics of their situation, and practical steps they can take to assert their rights and comply with the law. You can find more about us on our robust website at mass.gov/MOD. A lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight will also be on our website as information, and we can be reached out for technical assistance. So let me first focus on the laws federally and on the municipal obligations, again, related to town meeting and generalized overall protections. So under federal law, the Americans with Disabilities Act has various titles. Title II applies to state, local, and county government, and they strictly prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability. In fact, it says for Title II entities that no qualified individual with a disability shall be excluded from participation in or denied the benefit of the services, programs, or activities of a public entity. Under Massachusetts law, not town meeting law specifically, but under Massachusetts law, there are other parallel frameworks that mirror and sometimes exceed some of these federal protections. Article 114 of the Massachusetts Constitution, Massachusetts Equal Rights Law, the Public Accommodations Law, and the Service Animal Law all work together to ensure similar protections. that the Title II of the ADA does. Title II has many responsibilities for a municipality, but I am focusing on town meeting, not specific to there's 5 administrative requirements that are pretty comprehensive. If you're interested in that, we have other trainings that can go over that for town obligations, but for right now, I'm focusing on town meeting. So it's good to know that federal law is there, as well as some state law that backs it up, and sometimes our state law can be more stringent. For example, our building code is oftentimes more stringent than the federal building requirements under the standards. So with this kind of information, towns must proactively consider what accessibility features are necessary for meaningful participation in town meeting. And towns must respond effectively to individual requests for reasonable accommodations, and we'll talk about that. Just as an FYI, our agency, MOD, has sent a memo on reasonable accommodations at town meetings back in June of 2023, which lays out specific guidance for boards of selectmen, town managers, and municipal ADA coordinators. And a lot of my guidance tonight will also be found in that article and resources on our website. So it's good to take a look, and I will share that link later when I'm done presenting, if people want it. So let's define. We said that the cities or towns Title II must ensure that qualified individuals have access to their services and programs and activities. And to understand what these laws, we need to look at how the Americans with Disabilities Act defines disabilities and whether to qualify for protection under the ADA. And there are 3 prongs. Primarily, we're looking at prong 1, which is and again, I pardon me the terms, but these terms are used in the act itself and the language itself, and even the updates kept this language. So when you hear me say impairment, I don't like that word, but that is the law. So I'm reading what the law does state. So prong 1 of the 3-prong definition of disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of an individual. Major life activities can include walking, talking, seeing, hearing, working, caring for oneself, concentrating, as well as operation of major bodily functions, which include things like cardiovascular, neurological, digestive, reproductive, and normal cell growth. The ADA Amendments Act of 2008 broadened the definition of disability significantly to ensure that people were covered, and it added bodily functions as a major life activity for clarification. Prong 2 of the definition is a record of such an impairment, so someone protects individuals who have a history of a qualifying impairment, even if they are not currently limited. Again, you don't see that too much at town meeting. You're going to see more of the physical or other requests, but and being regarded as having such an impairment is the 3rd prong. Again, that protects people who, I guess, it protects people against discrimination against others perceived as having disabilities, even if they don't have one. This is, again, those 2 prongs are not heavily focused on, but the physical or mental impairment one is something that we would look at for accommodating for town meeting. The ADA's coverage is intentionally broad. It covers people with mobility, visual or hearing related disabilities, cognitive disabilities, chronic illnesses, mental health conditions, and many more. It also covers conditions that may not be visible to others, for example, hidden disabilities, such as PTSD, chronic pain, or cardiac conditions, as long as those conditions substantially limit a major life activity. So if you meet any of those prongs of the definition, you are a qualified individual under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and you are afforded protections under those as that definition. So when we look at town meeting, there are primarily 2 types of barriers people might encounter. One being physical barriers and one being programmatic barriers. Physical barriers are the architectural or spatial obstacles that prevent a person from accessing the venue or navigating it safely or independently. And things to consider about the town meeting venue could be things like, can the meeting location be accessed without climbing stairs? Are accessible parking spots available nearby the accessible entrance that you've designated? Are there adequate lines of sight and appropriate lighting for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing to see the sign language interpreters? Does the room have the AV equipment and connectivity to support CART or ASL interpreting or remote participation if needed? And another consideration could be, are the aisles and routes wide enough for a person to use a mobility device to navigate where they need to go during town meeting? A meeting room can be physically accessible and still contain significant programmatic barriers. So common programmatic barriers could include failing to provide that communication access real-time translation, that CART reporting, or ASL interpretation for deaf and hard of hearing attendees. If you're using electronic presentation materials and they are not made accessible to screen readers or lack audio descriptions for people who are blind or have low vision, could be a concern. Procedures that require a voter to stand and raise their hands to be recognized to speak when a disability prevents them from doing so could be a barrier. Not training, and I know we have a moderator as a panelist, but not training moderators and staff on how to handle accommodation request needs during the meeting itself could also be a barrier. So if there are physical or communication barriers in your community, and again, I'm not sure who's going to be seeing this, but if you are a municipal government, we offer, the Massachusetts Office on Disability offers a municipal ADA improvement grant program that could help fund some of those remediations you might need to do for it, like equipment or structural changes to a meeting location. If you want more information on that, again, visit our website. It's a very competitive grant program, but call us and we'll work with you on telling you what that's all about. So all of those items I was just mentioned, these can be addressed in pre-planning. Now, what happens when someone actually does make a request? And this is more of a generalized kind of overview of what a reasonable accommodation request might look like. So a reasonable modification is any adjustment or alteration to a public entity's policies, practices, or procedures that enables a person with a disability to access the public entity's services, programs, and activities. I want you to note that the term reasonable modification and accommodation are interchangeable at times, but typically reasonable modifications relate to Title II government activities. So if you're modifying you're making a modification to your policies, programs, or activities to ensure that they are inclusive. And the term reasonable accommodation is more associated with employment, which is a different title of the ADA we're not going to talk about tonight. But they are used interchangeably, and at least people use them interchangeably, so you may hear both tonight. Towns must provide reasonable modifications unless doing so would fundamentally alter the very nature of town meeting. So, for example, if someone is requesting you change the legally required voting thresholds, for example, altering statutory requirements from 2/3 vote to a simple majority, that could be deemed a fundamental alteration to the program of town meeting. Another example is if someone requests postponing indefinitely the meeting for some reason. Halting the town meeting entirely, which stops the town's essential legislative operations, would be a fundamental alteration to their program. However, even though a request, because people can request anything, it's whether it's reasonable or not, dialogue must continue even if it is determined as a fundamental alteration to the program. You must work to continue to find something that will work for both parties. Examples of accommodation or reasonable modifications could be, if we look at communication aids and services, it could be the CART, the Communication Access Real-Time Translation. It could be ASL interpretation. I just want to make a note, ASL is American Sign Language. There are many versions of sign language out there. American is just one of them, so you definitely want to work with the individual making that request and have that dialogue to see which interpretation service would work best for them, because American Sign Language might not. Let's see, for physical access improvements, you may need to, again, this may, for town meeting, it might be a little bit harder, but moving a meeting to a more accessible location could be something that could be requested, or relocating someone's seating location to better access the viewing of the materials that are being presented. And some procedural modifications could be allowing a voter to remain seated while speaking. If there's that rule that people must stand to speak, allowing a voter to remain seated. Allowing a voter to submit a written comment in lieu of speaking aloud. That could also be provided. Allowing service animals to accompany their attendees. And here's one I'm sure we'll get some questions about. Providing remote participation for a voter whose disability prevents in-person attendance. And I want to discuss that just a little bit, because I know it can be overwhelming to think about how you might implement that. But remote participation is a legitimate, reasonable modification available at both open town meetings and representative town meetings. Granting remote participation to an individual with a disability does not transform an in-person town meeting to a hybrid meeting. The meeting remains in-person meeting as billed. For example, if someone requests an ASL interpreter to be provided at town meeting, that doesn't turn the meeting into an ASL meeting. It keeps it the same meeting. It's just that accommodation provided. So remote participation works in the same way. You have to have a legitimate reason to need that request, and therefore it can be granted. Now, remote access can take many forms. It can be as simple as a person watching the local access cable broadcast and calls or texts the moderator or assistant to vote or speak. Something more robust could be a web meeting platform if the town has the infrastructure to support that. Towns that need to upgrade some infrastructure may also be eligible for our ADA grant through our funding source. When somebody makes a request, the dialogue is also known as the interactive process. So when a person with a disability requests a modification, a town must engage in what is called the interactive process, which is a dialogue with the requester to figure out the most appropriate and effective accommodation. The goal is to arrive at a solution that's both feasible for the town and effective for the person with a disability. The town does not always have to provide the exact accommodation that's requested, but it must genuinely try to find something that works with the understanding that the primary consideration of what's provided goes to the individual making that request. So if that person does request ASL, ASL is the first thing you need to try to provide. Again, if the request is reasonable on its face, a simple request for ASL interpretation, that can be done without further discussion. You don't need anything else. However, if it's a little bit more complex, towns should generally not ask for medical documentation. You should be taking the requester's statement at face value. However, in rare cases where the need is truly unclear after the conversation, the town must make limited tailored documentation. But this may ask for limited tailored documentation, but it's really the exception, not the rule. Never deny an accommodation without first engaging the interactive process. And if you deny someone's accommodation request, you must make sure that you have the rationale and reason why accommodation could not be provided and what was provided in its place. Again, this is an open dialogue. People want to participate, and this is just the interactive process allows for that genuine discussion. Now, I'm not just linking to the remote participation of town meeting, but a question that will come up about that is how do people vote when they are participating remotely based on a disability? And that's relatively easy. This requires planning in advance, and options could be, as we had mentioned earlier, texting or calling a vote to an assistant moderator, using a polling feature on a video platform, and it could be a written ballot that might be out there pre-town meeting, submitted electronically. Now, for all the town meetings that I've attended in my town, we've never had a secret ballot, but if there is a secret ballot vote, then that needs to be planned in advance. How is that going to work, and what would be most appropriate for, and that can be determined through the interactive process. So some best practices for all meetings. You want to regularly train municipal staff, boards, and committee members and town meeting moderators on disability laws and the accessibility obligations. You want to think proactively, plan for communication access and physical access before every town meeting. Include the ADA coordinator's contact information on every meeting notice so residents know who to call. That's a big concern. If people don't know who to call for an accommodations, you will never get those requests, right? Or the requests are going to be so sudden that you're not going to be able to fulfill it in a way that's effective, right? So you need to let people know in advance how they can make these requests, and providing them on the notice on the website and who to contact is a great way to do that. You also want to ensure that all materials posted on the town's website, including the warrant, the presentation slides, and maps, are accessible to screen readers to the best of the ability. MOD's website has guidance on creating accessible digital documents. We also have a YouTube page that has some of that as well. And if you're showing images, charts, or diagrams during town meeting, you want to provide some verbal audio descriptions so attendees with vision-related disabilities can follow along. If you have questions related to booking this communication access, whether it be the CART reporter or the ASL interpreters, we can discuss that further offline or during Q&A, and I think there might even be a question that will talk about this, so I'll save that for that. But understand that there is a process, and the earlier you try to reserve these to try to book these interpreters or the CART, the better chance you may have of filling that request. So if you do it 2 weeks out, it's going to be hard to fill. But if you do it 2 months out, 3 months out, you're most likely going to find someone to fill that role. So I've covered a lot, and I'm sorry I went to 20 minutes. I really do apologize about that. But we have trainings that do this in 2 days. So if that talk about all of the ADA responsibilities, even more than Title II. But we've covered the legal framework, ADA, Massachusetts law, the two types of barriers residents with disabilities might face, and the concept of reasonable accommodations. And I'd like to turn it over to Wanjiku to take over the first. But first, Marianne, I will turn it back to you. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I knew we were challenging you on a 10-minute time frame, so thank you. You have a lot to cover, and thank you. I think it's important to set the stage for the rest of the discussion. So thank you. Manjiku, would you like to
Yes,
take up what happens when someone comes to you with a request for accommodation?
yes. So thank you, Jeff. It was very concise, and I think it'll be helpful to then understand the framework in which the town then now functions for town meeting. So the ADA coordinator for the town is John Mingriotti, who's the town manager. When it comes to remote town meeting, he delegates some of the tasks over to me. When it comes to, and I'm going to be looking at my notes. For town meeting, I act as the central point of contact for requests for reasonable accommodation, for reasonable modification, excuse me, from community members. So in describing the process by which an individual can request reasonable accommodations at town meeting, the first place that a person can go is by sending an email to manager@actonma.gov. And that is then going to now, in the email, the person would then put that they need reasonable accommodation. At that point, I will then get in touch with them. And this is done at the very least 2 weeks prior to town meeting, preferably way before, so that way we can be able to create an accommodation. So I then will engage in dialogue, as Jeff mentioned, with the individual to work out or to identify a solution. So I will ask about the functional limitation that is presenting the individual from accessing town meeting. So because remote participation and voting are unique accommodation in Acton, I may ask for additional information about the disability that prevents a person from physically attending town meeting. So in most cases, the town accepts these statements at face value. So medical documentation is rarely needed. The goal of this process is to ensure that verified individuals can attend and vote at town meeting so that physical or health barriers are not a limitation. So as part of this process, when I say they are verified individual, I will ask for ID to verify that you do live in Acton and that you're a registered voter. So I will then go through that process with the clerk. So when the day of town meeting, I will then ask the person who now has who has requested the accommodation. In the Zoom, we do it via Zoom. On the Zoom call, I will ask the person or people who are participating to show me their ID. This is because I actually get a physical clicker, right? So the collaboration between Joanne and I, the town moderator and IT staff is critical. In the past, Joanne and I have worked like with eye signals, like if somebody in the Zoom room needs to be able to speak, then I'll kind of like signal over to Joanne. A limitation, very honestly, that we have is that so far I am the only person who is managing the Zoom room. So I'm limited in my ability with the clickers that I am able to manage, right? But we try to make whatever accommodations we possibly can. And I'll just end there, I'll just end there and pass it over to Joanne.
Thanks, Joanne. You want to take us through the next part and what you do as a moderator and what you've learned about what other moderators are doing?
Yeah, Yes, yes. So, first of all, thank you to Jeff and Wanjiko for joining us tonight. And I am very pleased that this is part of the Marge Kennedy legacy, as it were. And I will note, as Jeff said, there are trainings for moderators. There are several town moderators I notice on the list and who are joining us now. And this video will be not hosted, but posted on the Mass Moderators resource section. So that anybody who didn't get to see this tonight or in the future will be able to access this information. So first of all, many people have questions, why don't we just have hybrid and remote town meeting? So one of the things to keep in mind is representative town meeting does have a hybrid meeting process. Those members are known. It's a limited quantity. It's over 100, but the people are known, and very often now since COVID, some of the members do participate through a hybrid process, and that is allowed, but it's because the voters are known and identified and they have the ability to participate that way. Open town meeting, which is mostly what we're talking about here, is not available through a hybrid or remote process at this time. There are a few towns who are working with the legislature or trying to get it passed so that they can pilot a process of doing hybrid and remote participation for open town meeting. So far, that has not passed. There's been no legislative action, so we are now talking about actual live participation at town meeting with the exceptions that we've just heard. I did ask my fellow moderators what different towns have done to help make town meeting more accessible, and there are a number of things, and I would say they're in some broad general care buckets, whatever. So one of them is to address mobility. Is the building accessible? Some towns have, and we've done this in Acton, closer the entrance is closest to the meeting site, to the auditorium, has limited parking, but we do reserve that for folks with mobility issues, and there's a clerk assistant right there to check them in because our check-in area is some distance from the auditorium. So we've removed that barrier, and some other towns do also have an expedited process for folks with mobility issues. Many of us have meetings in high school auditoriums, and those are set up oftentimes with space for wheelchair seating so that you're not out in the aisle, but have a space. So that's another accommodation. Hearing is a big issue, and many towns do use either I forget what the words are for the live transcription, which we had done that in the past, but now are using, I think it's a Google Translate on screen. And that is helpful to so many people, not just somebody who is actually hard of hearing. That does help. And I do once in a while hear some chuckles because the translation isn't 100% accurate, especially on street names and people's names and stuff. But it's good enough so that people who might have a little trouble hearing, especially in some of the auditoriums, that does help with everyone being able to understand. The vision, there's at least one town that prints the warrant in Braille. I think maybe for one person, but that person requested it and it is done for them. Describing things, I think, is one of the things that people might forget to do the most, but hopefully we'll remember amongst ourselves to describe images that are being shown and stuff like that for folks who can't see or have trouble seeing that. Childcare is considered an accommodation. Many towns do either have some kind of childcare set up through their rec department or with the teachers, or what we're going to try and act in this year is part of the gym will be what we'll call the wiggle room, so that folks can bring the kids, still be part of the meeting, it will be in a room with an assistant moderator, but the kids can be somewhere in the gym, either doing their homework or playing or snoozing or whatever it is. And then when the parents decide it's time to go home, they can just bring them. I think there will be childcare the first night, but oftentimes there isn't for 2 nights. So that's another thing. I will say clickers are an accommodation that is helpful for everyone. But as Jeff was pointing out, not everybody can stand, not everybody can speak loud enough or raise their hand. And so the clickers, well, there's some folks don't like the idea of your vote not being known because you go to town meeting and everyone should know your vote, but it does enable so many more people, well, privacy, but who can't vote in another fashion. Super easy to click the button. Many towns offer rides to and from through their whatever van service or type of thing that they might have. And another thing is to get information out sooner, partly as when Chico said, so that you can know who to contact, also know what the accommodations are. How do you get a ride? Is there a number to call to get a ride? Is there a number to call to make sure you might reserve a spot for your children in the childcare area? And obviously questions about the warrant in general, just the sooner that information is out there. And that could help a person decide whether they need to go regardless of how difficult it is for them, or they can figure out what the accommodations are. And finally, I would say another accessibility issue is a language barrier. So in our town, we have, I noticed, offered many documents, including the warrant, to be translated in our case, Spanish, Portuguese, and Chinese are the most frequently requested, and different towns would have different needs in that area. And I'm not sure how they do that, but it is available. And I think I've covered pretty much. Oh, hearing assistance devices also some towns have. And that would be a, a a thing, an item which I have seen in classrooms, but we haven't used them in our town meeting, but I think they're pretty common in many settings. I think that's pretty much all of them. I'm sure I missed something, but that's really the bulk of the type of things that we
Thank
try to
you.
do to help. Yeah.
Thank you, Joanne. This is great. All of our panelists, thank you so much. That was really great information. We have a couple questions that we'd like to start off with. Each of you has touched on this in a way, but could you talk about what do you recommend that towns do to inform their voters with disabilities of the options available to them for increased accessibility to town meeting? So, Jeff, why don't you start us off?
Well, I think it's been said many times, right? It's letting people know who they can contact if they need an accommodation to the process. So the sooner that gets out, the sooner that information is known, especially for town meeting, because somebody requesting braille warrant is going to take you some time to produce. Should that request come in, I'm not saying you would have. There's other discussions you could have, but getting an ASL interpreter 24 hours before the event can be very difficult. So the more time you can give people, the better. You also want to post accessibility information like on the town's website as well. Not just for town meeting, but for other meetings as well. And you want to reach out to your local disability commission if you have one in your community. You can also reach out to the Council on Aging and other groups that serve residents with disabilities for their input as well. They may know more, although it's confidential and you want to be careful about what's shared, but they may know of generalities they could share with you of what might be expected. And you also want to consider a brief annual announcement at the start of town meeting reminding attendees of their rights to request accommodations, just as a reminder. But that's about what I have for this guidance on that one. I'll turn it over to the others.
Joanne or Wanjiku, do either of you have anything you'd like to add? Or I guess I'm thinking about, are there are there broader ways to distribute that information other than just waiting until the warrant comes out? And
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just going to say many towns, as Jeff said, first of all, there's Commission on Disabilities, just making sure that group is up to date. Um, and any organization in town that serves a broad population, certainly senior center, many schools have some kind of notice delivery system. Mostly it's probably online now, but if that got put out periodically, make sure you know when town meeting is, and if you need some accommodation, here's the number to call, through, and I know they won't always, any of these groups won't always publish your information, but as many groups with especially with larger memberships or whatever, just making that information, spreading it out that way, I think would help.
Yeah, I'd like to add along with that, in Acton, the Commission on Disabilities has been very proactive in advertising and stating that town meeting is for town meeting, we can make accommodations. So they have been very good in spreading out that information. Yeah.
and that's probably true for a lot of our other towns, that's something that towns could do, is work through that. Good. The next question I have is, what is the ballpark range of costs that accommodations might require a town to spend? And do these accommodations for town meeting benefit other participants beyond the individual who requests them? So Joanne, I'm going to push that to you first and let you answer that first.
Sure. So I found out that, so I think clickers is one of the big ones, and I know some towns wrestle with whether or not to use electronic voting, partly because of the cost, partly for other reasons. But in our case, we got new clickers last year, so 2025, and they were $47,000 for 1,300 clickers, and the first meeting, serviced by the company. And do I know the name of the company? I do not. I'm sorry. But so it was getting it started up and the clickers, which should last, a good number of years. And I think it's Google Translate is what we use, or Google Talk to Text. At that level was $2,400 for 2 nights. And we typically have 500 to 1,000, depending on what's happening, and we might exceed that at some point. But just so that gives people kind of a ballpark. If you have a smaller or larger town, it might be adjusted differently on either of those.
Jeff, you had mentioned a grant program. Is that applicable to some of these things we're talking about?
For hardware or like assistive listening devices, if you were going to purchase an amplification system for the purposes of the assistive listening devices to better communication efforts, that is definitely something the municipal ADA grant program could fund. We couldn't fund a subscription, we can't fund a software program, right? But we can fund structural communication and communication access requirements. So yes, definitely we can. The clickers too could have potentially been, if the argument was for disability access. So, we could have done something like that. So cost, it's so hard to answer this in a succinct way of what's the average cost. I know for communication access, that's usually your cost you're going to run into. That's your CART provider, like a court stenographer and your ASL interpretation. They're roughly about $100 to $200 per hour. And they have a 2-hour minimum usually. So however long your meeting goes, you can multiply it and figure it out. The good thing is a lot of these ASL interpreters and CART reporters can do stuff remotely. So making sure your infrastructure can support that would be great. That way they don't have to come in person and you're not charged travel expenses and time traveling. Physical improvements, I cannot give you estimates because that's so different. If you're putting on automatic door openers, temporary ramps, they can be costly. But again, those are things maybe the grant program could help offset the cost for. And many accommodations are low cost or no cost. Allowing someone to remain seated while speaking or providing a large print warrant costs essentially nothing. So, and having those accommodations or those elements in place, especially as Joanne had mentioned, when you have that CART reporting where someone's live translating it up on a screen for you, people use non-deaf or non-hard of hearing individuals use that all the time to follow along. I know I use it, right? If I miss a beat, I want to catch up, I can see it on the screen. So a lot of these accommodations are going to benefit people. Parents with strollers, if you have those aisles wide enough, if you have seating locations spread out, it's going to benefit more than just that individual making that singular request. But you may not know it. So because you may not ever hear other people saying thank you for this or that because they associate it with people with disabilities, but they're using it as well. So it's kind of like the curb cut effect, right? If you build it, they use it. Okay, I will stop there.
Manjiku, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think they said it all.
Okay. You got off easy on that one. The next question is, and I'll start with you, Wanjiko, is could you say one or two best practices that you think town meetings, not just in Acton, but in any of our towns, could implement that would make meetings more accessible for everyone?
Yeah, one thing that I would say is making sure, and when making sure that people know that it is available, right? Because I would say, in my experience, I've been with the town now for about 3 years, is that a lot of people don't know what is available. So when I say it like that, using the channels that are in your town to be able to communicate with community members. So I would say just letting it know that it's available. Because when people know that it's available, then now you start working out all those various kinks, right? But until you are in the situation, you don't necessarily know what it is that you need. So I would say that.
Okay. Joanne?
There we go. So I think the clickers definitely are helpful for everyone. And another thing that I forgot to mention earlier is either having a somebody walk around with a hand mic, and so for folks who are unable to stand in line, or have somebody responsible for adjusting the mic up and down so somebody approaching in a wheelchair will be able to reach it. That I think helps quite a few people because they feel they really have something to say, but they just can't stand there and wait for their turn. So we usually we have somebody and they just kind of wave the mic. The person raises their hand and I out in the middle or somewhere wherever they are, and I try to direct the person with the mic over in their direction, and that usually works pretty well.
Jeff,
So,
what would you add?
So two things specifically, and I think I've already mentioned them like 10 times, so I'm just going to say it again, but brief. Plan ahead for CART or ASL interpretation. It's the best advice I can give to a municipality is plan ahead for that. You can release them if you don't need them, but it's hard to get if you do. And if you are limiting your time, you don't handcuff yourself with the time loss. And people it doesn't only just help people with hearing loss, it also helps non-native English speakers, people in noisy environments, and people who simply find it easier to read along on stuff. The second one is make the venue work for everybody. A physically accessible location with a step-free entry, accessible restrooms, adequate aisle clearance. It is an ADA requirement, but it's not just an ADA requirement. Again, it can benefit more than that. It can benefit the elderly attendees, parents with strollers, and anyone who finds it difficult to navigate stairs. So, you want to make sure the venue fits your needs. And again, I'm not saying venues don't meet the needs. I'm just saying when you pick your venues, you want to be, make sure it's meeting these kind of needs. You have a strong signal, you have a good infrastructure, you have a good access. Those types of things are things that you can pre-plan for well in advance. So I'll stop with that.
I like that so many of these benefit everyone, not just the person who requests accommodations. So I think that's a really good point. And it helps put some of these costs that a town might incur um, for some of these accommodations, puts it in perspective because the benefits are wide. I The last question that I wanted to ask, and you've all kind of talked about specifically about having the idea of hybrid town meeting, but thinking more broadly than just that, are there legislative changes that could or should be made that would make meetings more accessible for more individuals? And I'll let you kind of jump in there wherever you want.
I'm sorry, who did you pass it off
I
to?
didn't. I said
Oh,
you can,
okay.
whoever
So
would
I'm
like to
gonna
go
just,
first, may.
because I work in an executive branch of state government, I'm going to have to recuse myself from this question. Just it's tough to talk about what promoting legislation. So I just have to be
Yep,
careful of that as a state agency. So I'm going to
fair
let Joanne,
enough.
and when you
Fair
come,
enough.
take that.
Um, so there is, as I mentioned, and as we all know, the legislation to allow remote participation or hybrid to actually be a hybrid meeting, to put it out there as you may participate remotely. There are people that think it will really help a lot of people access town meeting. I don't know if that's true. I agree that probably a pilot with a small number of towns willing to try it out and see what the kinks are, because I think this is a thing that you don't know what you don't know. They've thought of a lot of things, but I'm not sure that, like, when like when you think you've thought of everything, but then something comes up and you are surprised. And will that actually affect what town meeting is? It will affect what town meeting is regardless if it becomes a hybrid meeting. And there's a lot of considerations that I think need to be thought of before we go ahead and make that a full-on thing. I would definitely want to see a few towns experience in how that worked out for them before I would say we should all do it. And
I,
I don't know what else there could be except to maybe strengthen, if it's possible, strengthen the requirement for accommodations to participation. But I think we already have some pretty strong laws and regulations around that.
Wajiko, do you have anything to add to this or any other legislative changes you think would be important?
Um, no, I don't have anything to add. No.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple league members who are looking at the questions in the Q&A tonight, and I'm going to ask Janet and Pat if one of you could read out one of the questions we have, and we'll take a few of these as time permits.
Sure, this is Janet, and I've been keeping a running list of the questions. Not much overlap. It's fortunate. They're very good questions. The first question I'll start with is from Rebecca Gruber. Has anyone argued that having hybrid town meeting is a fundamental alteration to the program of town meeting? And then she follows up and says, as the presenter, who I think was Jeff Dugan at the time, just stated, an individual could ask to participate, quote unquote, remotely, which is different to me than hybrid town meeting.
Let me just answer that. That's exactly what I said. I said an individual, a qualified individual that needs an accommodation based on disability to participate remotely. That does not change the town meeting to hybrid. That is an accommodation for an individual who warrants that accommodation request. So it doesn't translate it to a hybrid. And I think you heard from Joanne about some concerns about taking town meeting to hybrid. Again, I'm not picking a side on any of that, but what I am saying is doing that individual's request, and it could be 3 people that participate remotely based on disability needs. Again, doesn't change it to a hybrid meeting. Keeps it the in-person meeting as required, or as the rules of town meetings apply. So hopefully that clarifies.
I
Okay,
assume
and
so.
unless either Joanne or Wanjiku has something to add to that, why don't we move to another question?
This is from Anonymous. For a town committee member who needs to vote on a matter but is unable to verbally do so, what are other valid forms of voting? Can they give a gesture, type in a chat when they're participating virtually, write on paper?
Good question.
So with the people who are, or a person who is participating virtually, they can write in on the chat and then I verbally speak. Yeah. I have not yet.
Or Wanjico has used the clicker, and the highest number we've had so far participating in this manner is 2. So it has been manageable thus far.
Okay. There's another question that's sort of related to that issue of participation. It's from Carmen Reese. Do I understand correctly that in Acton, the supervisor of the Zoom for those participating remotely would have an electronic voting clicker for each Zoom participant and be charged with registering a vote as directed by each participant on the clicker for that participant?
Yes, that is correct. So in the places where voting with a clicker is what is called for, yes, I would be voting on the person's behalf. In the issue, I think sometimes we've had to do like a poll. I am speaking for the person, so to speak.
And then, Marianne, I just have 2 more things. One is more a comment, which I think the panelists had addressed. It was a reminder from one of the audience members to keep in mind that for deaf people whose first language isn't English, a live ASL interpreter might be more effective than cart captions in English. And then the last question, I think this is the last question we have. It's from Tara Zanto, who asks, what do you feel the League of Women Voters could do beyond this webinar to support increased participation of those with disabilities? Wide open.
Who would like to go first on that one?
Sure, I will. As a longtime league member and a shorter time moderator, I am certainly interested in having people participate as much as possible. Getting the information out, and the league, a league in a town, a league chapter in a town can have a very strong effect on making changes to participation in voting and participating at town meeting by helping the town or working with the town to get more information out, to perhaps hold informational meetings about hot items coming up on the warrant at town meeting. And we know that those sorts of like are you trying to build a fire station or have a school override vote or anything with dogs, people are going to come. But if you can help provide information ahead of time, so that people will feel comfortable attending. And also, one of the things we're doing in Acton this year is having people do short videos. I've done one, some of the select board members, some different other people, they're in progress, just talking about what's it like at town meeting, to lower the intimidation factor for somebody who has not participated before. You can, and many towns have cable, whatever your cable or local access channel is recorded. So perhaps you can go and look at some older meetings and just see what it's like. And it's really a bunch of neighbors, people ordinary people just talking about how are you going to spend your money and how are you going to use your land? Those are the big things. And then if there's some dogs or marijuana or something like that, that sparks some interest. But it's things that affect you every day and you don't have to speak, just going and listening and hearing what different people have to say, but then voting. Hopefully the league can help make that a friendlier, less intimidating process for people who haven't participated before.
And while you're on, I did realize there's one more question from somebody, and it sounds as if it's better suited for
Hang
you.
on, Janet, can you wait just 1 second?
Yeah.
I just wanted to see whether Jeff or Wanjiko had anything to
Oh,
add
okay,
to what
sorry.
Joanne had said. No, it's okay.
Well, so really, I'm not a member of the Women's League Voters, but what I do think is
Oh, we're
keeping doing
three
what
for three tonight. Wow.
no, keep doing what you're doing. Really, events like this, getting the word out, doing these information sessions. We can even do more if you wanted. This type of stuff I think is really going to help and hit the people that need to reach. And I will work with our communications director in our agency to maybe we can link to this forum, this panel discussion, because it is related to people with disabilities and that is part of the topic. So it would be great to put that on our website or to share it a link through that. So I'll see if we can do that. But I think things like this are just great. Getting out in the community and doing this, talking about it.
Yeah, and also adding to that, I would say in my role as the DEI director, I would say that, for instance, a town like Acton, I believe there's about the population of Acton is one where there are a lot of people who have who have moved into Acton. So civic engagement for them looks different. A lot of people don't know how town government works. So for the League of Women Voters, as you were saying, Joanne, I think for towns, they are positioned to be able to educate people as to how do you engage with town meeting, how do you engage with town, because the reach is a lot closer to where you are. For instance, as you mentioned, Marianne, I'm in the League of Women Voters in Boston. The reach that we have, because Boston is so much larger, is very different in Acton. So, for instance, like an event like this, the reach can be so much broader, and engaging with community members can be so much easier, because engaging and communicating with 25,000 people is a lot different than communicating with millions of people.
Good point. Thank you. Janet, do you have another question you were starting to ask? Sorry.
Yeah, this is actually probably either Wanjiko or Joanne or both could answer. Somebody wanted to know whether one of the panelists could share the general procedure for other towns in the league. We have a number of member towns within the Acton Area League about requesting accommodations. So I don't know if Joanne or Wanjiko has more information about the member towns in the league, or Joanne in particular, or if that's something that perhaps our league needs to look into and share on our website at some point.
Well, I think it's back to a person in any town should certainly contact somebody at town hall to get started if it's not clear who the correct person is to contact, to start with anybody and try to get, if there's nothing that looks like ADA coordinator or something in that nature, or call the town manager and they should be able to direct you to where you should go. And as everyone has said, sooner is better. But of course, if you discover at a week before town meeting that you're in a body cast, you're still entitled to call and see if some reasonable accommodation can be made. And as both have said, it's a conversation, it's a interactive process. So don't give up and reach out to whoever seems the most likely.
Okay.
Did you have any more questions while I was dealing with the questions we had accumulated? She was monitoring. I don't know if you want to ask those or if we're running out of time.
I think we've got time for one more question if there is one.
Pat, would you like to ask it? Pat?
Yeah, sure. This question, there are actually two, and I think they'd probably both be for the definitions Jeff has brought to us. The first one is if someone who, due to fatigue and reduced function related to disability, is unable to attend evening meetings, but wants to participate by sharing a public comment or engaging otherwise, what is the reasonable accommodation for that situation?
I'd probably need a little bit more information, but I think it's part of the dialogue between the ADA coordinator, the moderator, and the individual. If it's a disability related thing, there might be ways to put their comments in writing and submit them. That might be when that topic comes up. There might be an agreement, again, depending on what's reasonable and what's not, for that to be either read aloud if that's something they can't be. I don't really have a great answer on the off the top of that, because I don't know if I fully understand the question. But if someone is if they need an accommodation to the process, they have that right without fundamentally altering the program. So like they couldn't say, well, move it to morning when you have it at noontime. I don't know. I think a fundamental alteration could be changing the time of town meeting if it's always been at X time and moving that time. If they want to have communication, but and maybe that's where they can be in the room, but I'm just trying to think. It's 8 o'clock, and I'm just having a brain meltdown at this point. But and that's a great question. So I would love to talk about it more, and maybe others have comments, and I can build off that. Maybe. Sorry.
Okay. Mary Ann, can we take
Yeah,
one more related
Why
to
don't you
that?
go ahead? Why don't you go ahead with the last one, Pat?
This would be the last one. The question, again, for Jeff, is similar. Would someone with a temporary issue, such as recovery from major surgery, hospitalization, or COVID, be eligible for an accommodation to attend a town meeting remotely?
It's going to depend on whether that condition qualifies under the definitions of disability under that. Temporary disabilities or temporary issues are not usually covered or protected as a disability. Like if you break your leg, you break your leg, right? But if there's complications in the healing and that leg never heals right or other things happen, then you build into disability and therefore an accommodation could be there. So if someone's temporarily injured or something happens that's only temporary in nature and not long-term, then they may not be afforded full accommodation. I would say work with the individual to see what you can do because you want to be civil and you want people to participate. So I would think if someone broke their leg and they can't make it, that might not warrant, because remote participation is something very unique based on disability. But if it meant them not standing at a town in line for it, then maybe that's something you could work with the individual with.
Thank you. Alyssa, could you put up that last slide, please? Again, that last couple questions to me just underscores what I think has come through very clearly tonight, which is the interconnections between someone at Mass Office on Disability and the role they play, the local ADA coordinator, and the town moderator, and how they can work together to kind of support each other and support the individual who requests accommodation. I think we are very lucky in all our towns to have people filling these roles and moderators who are doing their best to manage it, and good to know that they've got good support in the Mass Office on Disability for some of these questions that will come up. So again, I'd just like to say thank you to our panelists tonight. Thank you to all of you for joining us. I hope you learned something. I certainly learned a lot. And we will make the recording available on our league website, which is on the screen. And I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Mary Ann.